how are you?
Jay, how are you, my friend?
How's your mom?
Yeah.
My mom's good.
Yeah.
She's
Turned the corner?
Are there any Oak Hill members here?
Should we get started? Let's call the meeting to order here. First order of business is to approve our minutes from our April 23rd meeting.
So move.
Thank you. And
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. We have approved minutes.
We were more productive than I thought.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
Wow.
So when we last left our heroes, we were going through, and I think we had a very productive and fruitful discussion on our housing policies. And I like the fact we call it a policy and not an incentive.
So do I.
Robin went ahead and tried to capture some of our discussions. And does everybody have a copy of the red line that was sent out earlier?
So you want a hard copy?
Yeah, if I could, thank you so much.
Hi Lisa, how are you?
Almost full house.
Hey Lisa, how are you?
Morning, Lisa.
Good morning, how are you?
I think this is I'd like to use this as a starting point for our discussions today. Joe, Lisa, if you haven't had a chance to read through it, we can take a minute and just go
It's
through
the
it.
red line version.
Because ultimately, I think this will be what we want to have the committee approve and present to the board, I guess, for general approval. And so I'll give everybody 2-3 minutes to review it.
I see you did your homework.
So I apologize, I wasn't here. Can you explain a little bit more why the square footage and now just the 10%? I know that some of our struggles have been, are the 10% affordable equal to or as the same as a normal? Now, what does that do to change that? What was the thought process?
So what we did is we didn't want to detract from the spirit, which is we want 10% of representative units. we were doing it by square feet because we felt that was the most easiest way to measure it. But I think for people who have to do compliance, that was really difficult to say, did you get 10%? If you have 112,000 square feet, did you get 11,200 square feet? So what we changed it to was 10% of the total units, but then what we said is that they must be a representative cross-section.
Yeah.
So we're basically doing the same thing, just doing it in a way that's easier to measure. So if in that 112,000 square feet, there are 100 units, it's easier to count 10 units than it is 11,200 square
What does
feet.
it, okay, so devil's advocate,
Sure.
there's 80% 3-bedroom, 15% 2-bedroom, and 5% 1-bedroom. Are all the affordable in that 10% going to be a 3 and a 2 and a 1?
That's what
the
that's what the language
cross-section.
would be. So we would look and say if 80% of the units are 3 bedrooms, we would look and say we want 8 units to be 3 bedrooms.
So that's what the,
That's what the
reference-
representative cross-section. And then the other 2 can be, you can do a 1-bedroom and a 2-bedroom type of thing, so,
No wiggling around this.
yeah.
Okay, quick
So
clarify.
we'll use the project as an example. So we have a project coming up that is an 80,000 square foot building with 70 units. And we're actually looking at closer to 12 units to be set aside. We'll get into that. And they have 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. So what we're looking for is an equal number of in that instance, there's not an 80% or 3, it's kind of there's
it's
equal
equal,
number of units,
yes.
so we're just doing equal numbers of a set aside of 1, 2, and 3. I think we'll be flexible with the higher bedroom units and, maybe 2, 3 bedrooms, 4 2 bedrooms, 4 1 bedroom.
Is there any data that shows that the demand is a 3-bedroom, as a 2-bedroom, is a 1-bedroom? Is there
We
any
don't
kind
know.
of?
We don't have any data.
We would like to do a market study so we can understand better not only what the demand is for a certain type of housing, but to your point, do we need 3 bedroom affordable units
Right,
more
just
than
because
1
we're
bedroom?
offering it doesn't mean they're gonna fill, right?
Right.
It's a great
And-
question, Troy, and I think I think we can see how this rolls out and we can adjust as we get more data, but I think
Right now, we're just
in the
trying-
absence of the data, we're gonna say we just want a representative sample. So
Yeah.
in that case, if they're spread out equally between 1, 2, and 3, we would look for roughly a third, a third, a third.
And why that amount? Why not just 15% or 20% of housing be?
We'll come to that. Right now, we're talking about
Yeah.
if we're looking for,
If it's 10,
if it's 10, whatever the percentage is,
yeah.
we're
it's the
looking
same
for a
kind-
representative
concept, yeah.
sample
Right.
of it. So if, we're not talking about the set aside right now, we're talking about the complex. If the complex is divided equally
Right.
between 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, we would look for the affordable units to be equally divided between 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. We can modify that as data comes in, but we're not looking, we don't want a developer to say, I want all of the units to be the 1 bedrooms, or all of the units to be a studio, unless we determine that's where market need is and we're okay with that. But at the moment, the wording is designed to give, and it's done for the convenience of being able to count. It's easier to count units than it is square footage.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
And we said too, were we going to initiate the housing study to get the data, the macro data? I know that's probably a separate
Yeah,
conversation.
that's an agenda item.
Yeah, I
But
think-
we did talk about,
We did, and we're
Yeah.
gonna
Yeah.
table that. I know, well, we've talked
So is there
about,
gonna
We have
be,
discussed it,
yeah.
is there gonna be flexibility? Let's, devil's advocate. I have an 800
Playing the role
square
of the devil
foot.
today will be Troy.
oh,
Hey, it's a shoe fit.
what a surprise.
I have an 800 square foot 3-bedroom. now my other 3-bedroom for affordable becomes a 500 square foot. Is there anything in there to deter that kind of thought process?
I think that will be really the staff to discuss that. What we don't want is we don't want the developer to put their thumb on the scale and give the least desirable units. And that's why we put in a representative cross-section.
That covers it.
Like, we don't want,
It covers it, but not without the square footage. You're gonna have 800 square foot
Yeah.
offered to affordable and a 1,200 offered 3-bedroom.
So-
We're gonna have to
taking-
know the square footage of the units to make sure that it's representative,
You know,
and that's not something we've been asking for. We have just been relying upon the bedroom count and letting the developer, not that we've had that many of them, but letting the developer tell us, we'll just set aside 2 of the, but we haven't gotten into the weeds on square footage per unit. But we will, I mean, we will.
I think we're gonna have to, and it goes, there's a broadness to the language, but I think there's strength in doing that. The other thing too is, the spirit of this language is not to give the least desirable units as affordable. Least desirable can be defined as the smallest, can be defined as if there's something they overlook a tar pit and the others have this magnificent view of the city.
But Jay, hold on a second.
Yeah,
Set aside must be a representative cross-section.
right.
So, to me, that's not that vague. So if I have 50 units, right, and 20% of my units are 1,000 square feet, and the rest of them are 700 square feet, I need to make sure that cross-section includes that piece. That would be a fair interpretation to me. So if I said, a fair interpretation would not be, I'm gonna give you whatever percentage we pick of my smallest units. That's not a cross-section.
Correct.
So that's how I viewed it, Troy. So if I had, again, not to be redundant, we have 100 units, right? And out of 100 units, 50 of them are 700 square feet and 50% of them are 1,000 square feet.
We would expect.
You need 5 and 5.
Correct.
If 10%'s our number.
Correct.
So,
So we're not being prescriptive, but.
does that make
but-
sense?
That makes perfect sense.
Absolutely, and I think reasonable people are going to interpret it that way.
Right.
What we know sometimes is
Yeah.
the
right.
folks, but I think that is the spirit, and I think that's
Yeah.
what we're trying to, and I think Allison
I
and
think
you guys are on board with
We
that.
know, staff knows what you're looking for.
Yeah.
To be able
Yeah.
to say, to guide them, this isn't gonna fly, or this is.
Yeah.
And some of this is not gonna come up until compliance. It's one thing to talk to the applicant and for them to apply, and yes, we're gonna set aside these units. And then when they get into compliance, I venture a guess that they're gonna find something different, and we'll have to,
Hopefully they don't, but if we do.
hopefully not, but it's like, because you can imagine the scenario of a new construction, you lease up the best units, and maybe you're left trying to make the affordable set aside get there with what you have left.
The other thing is we
Yeah.
talked about the two-site,
Yes.
I'm sorry.
So the,
we talked about the two-cycle meeting, so you're
Correct.
gonna see it.
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
and
oh,
that's
so
something.
Troy, that will be helpful for what you're talking about. What we're gonna do with housing projects going forward, except the 2 that are on the May agenda because they were already in the pipeline, we're gonna make housing projects come to 2 meetings. So they'll come to the first meeting, and it's basically what we call a feel-good resolution, where we accept the application and show our intent to move forward with the project. But it'll be an opportunity for the board to look at this detail and give the applicant's feedback, and they do not get final approval until the next meeting. So they might come in May, that's not gonna happen, but just play it out. They'll come in May, you talk to them, you get an idea of the project, the set aside, and they don't get any benefits until they come back in June and present the application again, hammer out any issues, react to anything we heard at the public hearing, and then you can decide to approve benefits or not.
So those are the opportunities, and thank you for that, is to bring up and say, hey, I see 100 units, 50 are 50 of them are 700, 50 of them are 1,000. We expect to see the set-asides equally divided between those. We don't want all of them to have the tar pit view versus the city view.
But can't
Yeah.
staff go over those same guidelines so
So-
they don't have to come back for, just devil's advocate, for a separate meeting to discuss the same issues?
They can, but I think there's value in doing that because I think staff are going to do the best in terms of trying to get into our minds, but I think the applicant should hear it from us. And I think us having a discussion around the table, I think is really valuable, particularly as we look to implement these changes here. And I think, we can, like, for instance, one of the things I want to bring up is the 10%, and should that number go up? I would say, and this is Jay Popley speaking, is if we see a luxury unit, I may say, look, 20% isn't sufficient. I'd like to see 30% here. On the flip side, if we see someone who's saying, I want to do all workforce housing, we may look and say, look, we're willing to waive it, or we only want 10%. And I think
That's a
those
good-
are discussions to happen at the first
That's a
meeting.
good-
But I think, look, I want to say a few things to you. So I've done some research since our last meeting. When we compare what other IDAs are doing, when you look at multifamily and you say, it all becomes what's profitable, right? So a multifamily complex in Genesee, Orleans, Wayne County does not compare to Monroe County. It is not a fair comparison. It's really a waste of everybody's time. The multiples are night and day. They trade differently. The rents are not even close. I owned multifamily in Wayne County that would trade at a 10 cap when those same assets in Monroe County would trade at a 5 cap. So those counties need to incentivize any developer they can to build there. They're in a different situation than we are.
Can you explain trade at a 10 cap versus
Sure.
trade at a
So-
5 cap in layman's terms? I'm sorry.
All right, so that means, so it takes the net. You take the net and you say, okay, this building takes in $1 million a year. And the net on the building is 500,000. So in an environment where it would trade at a 5 cap, in an environment it would trade at a 10 cap, the 10 cap is half the price. Lower the cap rate, higher the price.
Okay.
Higher the cap rate, lower the price.
Okay.
So a same asset that would trade in Monroe County and if you want, I can go through the math with you one of these days, but to just show you how to evaluate a cap rate,
Yeah.
it's not that complicated.
Yeah.
Anna loves math.
I love it.
Yeah, I could show you.
She's pretty good at
I
it
could show
too,
you.
you
And
know?
really, a cap rate's a good way for me to articulate to you. I don't evaluate a cap rate. To me, it's kind of like EBITDA, which is like bullshit accounting.
Yeah.
It really doesn't make sense to me, right?
Yeah.
But so I just don't do it. I just don't think it holds anymore. But
Joe, if I can, just real quick math, so if it's like $500,000, a 10 cap is you're dividing that $500,000 by 0.1, which is 10%.
Okay.
So that's a $5 million property.
Okay.
A 5 cap is you're dividing that same $500,000 that the property's throwing off by 5%.
Okay.
So now that
getting
property is worth $10 million.
A lot more.
yeah, so it's double.
Yeah.
And
multiplier.
the reason, and that's a quick and dirty way of looking at it. You got to remove amortization, depreciation off of those numbers, and then you get the true number. But you get it. It's double.
Yeah.
Like the values are double. So rent consequently is, if you raise rent, I'll give you an example. If you raise rent in Wayne County, there's rent abatements, right? But if you raise rent in Wayne County 10%, your vacancy rate rises. There's landlords raising rent in Monroe County 30 and 40%, and the vacancy rate isn't rising. So it's just a different economic environment completely.
It's interesting because HUD holds us to the MSA statistics
Yeah.
when it comes to our affordable rents,
Right.
which include, it's a 5-county area.
Right.
So we're effectively, like, our HUD rates are the same as Wayne County's,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Which is just interesting when you
It
hear
is,
that
and it makes it hard.
perspective.
It makes it hard.
Right.
Yeah, for people living in Monroe County with those income levels to get into the lower, which is another reason why
Yeah,
it's
there's
good
more
to
competition.
expand the.
Yeah.
That's the reason for the two meetings
Opening
is,
it, yeah.
is we have the opportunity to look at each property and on an individual level, provide that feedback. And it's wonderful to have someone with Joe's expertise and knowledge, and Lisa, your expertise and knowledge on the board to be able to say, yeah, this makes sense. We are in a situation where, okay, this is a unit, or this is a project that deserves a lower percentage because of where they are. Or, no, this should deserve a higher percentage. And like I said, I come back to the projects that haunt me. If you look at the project at East and Goodman, right? Yeah, technically, is it in or
Right.
adjacent to
Right.
a distressed area?
Yeah.
No reasonable person's gonna call that a distressed area.
Correct.
And
That's right.
we can look and say, okay, we hear that, but we have discretion, and, the reason we're on the board is so that we can go and drive by and say, yeah, no, this is a,
And we're finding that we're getting feedback from the affected taxing jurisdictions. For instance, the project you're gonna see in May, the host municipality wants a higher number of affordable units. They're okay with more modest reductions in rent, which we've gone back and said, no, we follow HUD guidelines. So it's gonna be a balance too of meeting the needs of the host municipality.
Jay, would we want to change the wording from 10% to make it a little more flexible? Or would we leave that up to the first meeting?
I think this is
Between 10 and 30%?
this is something I wanted to discuss among this
Right.
group. We started, for those keeping score at home, when we started this, however many years ago, we purposely started low to say, okay, let's see how
that
this.
works out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I would like to put that on the table in the sense that we've seen in, I'd say, half a dozen, maybe more, that the 10% really isn't that much of a barrier. That,
Or meaningful, perhaps.
Yeah.
or meaningful, however. Well, cutting to the chase, I'd like to put 20% in here as a minimum. And we can have that discussion at the first meeting if we want to bring it lower. But I think it would be incumbent on the applicant to demonstrate to us that we should go lower.
Yeah.
And that we may go higher if you're going luxury, like Pittsford Canal side as an example. I would be okay with saying, look, you want to charge those rents? I'd like to see 30%.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, but that should be a discussion point. At least if they were to come back, I would, and this housing policy was in place, I would look and say, why aren't we going above 20%? And we should be very open with the applicants and saying, hey, look, these are the type of criteria. You may hear the board wanting a greater percentage. Here are some parameters that, based on what you put in, maybe you should be asking the board for a lower percentage, but here's what they're going to want to see. They're just not going to say it, and it's going to be very difficult with financials because they know the financials more than we do. And what they're going to present to us is going to support their case.
Yeah.
So I want to be able to be things that we can independently verify. I can tell you any project looks good or poorly, and if you don't have access to audit it, there's no way you're going to find out.
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you, I spent a lot of time since our last meeting. So I took projects that I own. I did one in Penfield. I did one in Greece. I did one in Arundecoit. I did one in the city. I did one in Brighton. And I said, okay, as a developer, my rate of return, if I had a tax abatement, a 10-year tax abatement, what percentage of the complex could I give to affordable housing and still turn a good ROR, right? So, and I did it in every town that I had.
It's good stuff.
And I came up with, if I gave 50% away, my ROR is still over 7.
50% set aside as affordable. You still maintain.
I'm still making 7 points on my money. In Irondequoit, I'm making 13 because Irondequoit, the tax rates are, they got a problem there, but they really do.
So by abating those tax rates, your rate of return goes up.
Right. Yeah. So
That's very interesting. Good analysis.
So, and now I'll share this with you. Now, and I looked at it like this. I said, okay, if Troy and I were investors, right? And today I can walk the ESL and I can give them my dough, and they're going to give us 5% on a commercial savings account. You got to beat that by at least 20, right? 200 basis points to make it even worth your time. So that's where I looked at the 7 was my. I said, okay, what percentage could I give away at 7? So the number that, and everything you said, Jay, makes total sense to me, and I agree with everything you said. We could set a 50% set aside, and every developer that comes in here is going to have a good day. I'm not saying that's what we should do. I'm just sharing that with you because those are real numbers.
So Joe, so in light of what Joe's saying, what are folks' reactions? I'm submitting 20%.
Yeah, I'm
What about a
shocked
range,
that
Jay?
they come
What
and
about a
cry to us
range,
and
22?
we know they're still making money.
Well, they're not
Oh,
willing to put the money down
Right,
to get their loan to value where it needs
Right.
to be. They're relying upon benefits from the IDA to get the loan to value where it needs to be.
right.
Right. So what I was going to suggest is you don't want to lock it in, right? So if a developer comes in and it's workforce housing and we want to give them 10%, we just want to do 10% because it's in an area that we need workforce housing and it makes sense, we can do it. But I think the barometer should be at 35. Because if you did 35, you're still giving them, and then I did the math at 35%. I mean, it's north of 25% on your money. So, especially with these rental rates that we have.
Right.
So I would use 35% as our barometer, and I think they're making plenty of money. It's a reasonable set aside. Somebody comes in with 100 units, you're giving 35 units to affordable. That's a real dent. It's not like, 10. It's a real dent for taking it off the tax rolls, which benefits everybody in the county. And I can't emphasize to you enough. That's really, every time somebody builds something here, it benefits everybody.
Yep,
And the minute we pull it off for 10 years, it doesn't benefit everybody.
I want to turn that around to, I want to link that with another point that I have. So I would love to get that number as high as we can. The one thing that I want to be cognizant of is what happens after 10 years. So we've got, so just hear me out on this. So after 10 years, the pilot goes away. You've got someone, let's say from day one has lived there. Does their rent all of a sudden go up to market rates, which when the pilot's over is perfectly within the right of the developer to do so. I don't think that's in the spirit of what we want to see.
It's not.
So coming back to the percentage, I would rather see a lower percentage, but to put a restriction on that if someone is been in that unit, you cannot, there are limits on the rent you can raise, even post-pilot, until that person.
Can we do that?
I don't
Do we
know.
update when we're talking about updating our UTEP, do we incorporate a housing pilot that is
At
longer
some-
than 10 years
We
and
could,
contemplates that?
once the pilot is done, we have no privity of contract with the applicant, so we would have no enforcement mechanism on rents.
Or
So
not
what-
even enforcement, they don't have to tell us anything.
No, we
So
have
what
no-
can we do? Because that is not
Here's what you can
not a
do.
good situation.
There's two things you can do. You can say, that's why, in my opinion, the prudent thing to do is say, we only do affordable. That's what we do. Because it's impossible
Right.
to take an affordable housing complex and make it non-affordable.
Right.
That's a heavy lift.
How does a shelter rent pilot work? I mean,
It
I know
doesn't-
shelter rent's 20 years,
Shelter
but
rent, it depends on the underlying financing. We typically do shelter rents in two scenarios: housing in Henrietta for students, or it's a bond deal. It's a pure
Right.
affordable.
Sure,
and
sure.
it's a bond deal, and we match the tenor of the bond, so it's, a 30-year shelter rent typically. But you bring up a good point, because there are projects like the one across the street Robin was talking about that are 100% affordable.
And they'll
So you're
always
never, and they're regulated by the state and the feds, so they will always be.
And they'll always be.
And you
Easy
you don't
peasy,
have
right?
this issue.
Easy, Jay. And I'll tell you this.
Right.
If you do this, if this is what we do, all we're doing is controlling it for 10 years.
Right.
That's all we're controlling. And what happens after 10 years is any good developer, the minute that pilot expires and they're paying property taxes, they're going to raise those people's rent to market as their leases come due,
Yep.
and they're going to force them out. And that's what they're going to do.
And there's nothing we can.
And there's nothing we're going to be able to
And
do
even
about
worse when there's no
don't
pilot
wanna-
and it's sales tax only.
Right.
It's even
Well,
worse.
But I want to have that discussion, because I don't believe there's nothing we can do. I would like to at least have some dialogue on that. So let's all throw this out there. As long as someone is in those units, can we continue on with the pilot for another 10 years instead of, like, it starts off at what, like a 90% abatement, and then it goes 80, 70,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Can we do it where it's only a 10% abatement or a small percentage abatement, as long as someone is there? You cannot force those people out. So we still have an enforcement mechanism.
They could just say, we want to terminate our pilot, right?
what?
Yeah, they can
They
just
can just
elect to
terminate.
terminate the pilot.
They could terminate the pilot, which they could do anyway.
Right,
At any time.
They could do anyway.
right.
So
They could do anyway.
So here's the thing, is that 10%? That is just a terrible situation that I don't think anyone really wants to.
That situation that we have now. So there's a Bob Morgan property that Morgan out of King of Prussia is trying to sell. They're trying to get out, and that had a pilot, and you can see the rent roll. The pilot expired, I think, in 21 or 22. I think it was given out in 12, if I'm not mistaken. And you can see the difference in the rent. And if they had a pilot, even if they had a 50% pilot for the taxes, they're not gonna, because it's value, right? That rent is worth real value if they're gonna sell it, especially if they're gonna sell it. Back to that cap rate thing,
So are you talking about like an option to renew the pilot at the end? If they want to maintain the units for another certain number of years?
So I'm asking you as, because I'm trying to say what we want to do in spirit and help us do it so that.
I think we need to take it back and think about all of the implications, because remember, staff prepares like a cost benefit analysis. It's not only because we're required to, but also we're trying to figure out prevailing wage, among other things. If you have options to renew, are we supposed to take that into account and to do the cost benefit analysis and implicate prevailing wage potentially? So we have to look at it. I don't know what the impacts would be.
And I want to ask you this, Robin. What about as time goes on and you do more and more projects, and let's say in a 10-year window, what kind of staff do you need to keep track of it all? And right? Like,
Yeah, we're having those conversations right now.
I think we're okay.
My perspective,
Joe, the
They're
short
sleeping here.
answer is we're going to need people to
staff
monitor
to
this.
manage it.
Right.
But I think we look and we say,
do you outsource it? Do we,
Likely.
yeah.
right? Do
And
you
I think
outsource it, or do we have more?
we've got the budget to do it.
Yeah.
And I think this is the right policy these are the right discussions. So if this means some expense to monitor, speaking for myself, I think I'm happy to do that. I think that's the right way to go.
As long as there's a way to do it, I'm good with it. I just don't want to come up with something then logistically
Agreed.
it doesn't work,
exactly.
right?
Which is why we went to the number of
We just got to make
units
sure
versus
whatever we
square
come up with,
footage.
we can execute it
Of
over a
course.
long period of time.
So Jay, going back to what Joe's talked about over and over and over again, the money that's being made, I'm sensing Joe saying that if it's not 100% affordable, we shouldn't even consider it.
What about adaptive reuse? What about old
building.
vacant buildings that are in need of repair, that are vacant, and,
Yeah.
you know, is there any room for, are we contemplating adaptive reuse and?
Well, I think adaptive reuse has got to come into it. I think workforce needs to come into it. But I think new developments should be, this is just my opinion, right? And it's like,
construction.
We have the highest level of scrutiny on the new, brand new.
I think the new stuff should be affordable, and then it's affordable forever.
Isn't it, to Anna's questions, adaptive reuse and all of that, isn't that priced into it? So like if I've got that building over there and I'm redoing it.
Yeah.
And it's gonna cost me $10 million to redo it.
Right.
That's gonna be factored into the price,
100%.
right? I'm not gonna pay 10 million if I've gotta pay.
100%.
So I think the market kind of takes care of that.
100%. But in areas,
If we get historic credits, those things, they help with all of that.
The reason why I ask is I know in looking at other IDAs, Erie County has a special, and probably other counties as well. They look at
Erie County has
adaptive reuse
only
with a
done
different
housing
lens.
and adaptive reuse. They have an unwritten policy that they don't do ground up construction on housing, only adaptive reuse.
Interesting.
And I think.
It's not written anywhere.
And back to adaptive reuse, I think if it's in a blighted area, then that building is gonna stay vacant.
Yeah.
Then we need to step in and help. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's just an eyesore, right? It's not good for the community. But if it's not in a blighted area, the free market system's gonna take care of itself. Right? We don't need to help somebody with their bottom line.
Or interfere in the market.
Right.
It's at a different.
What I have no desire to do is help a developer increase his bottom line for a nominal amount of low-income housing or whatever you want to call it.
It's not meaningful.
It's a waste of my time, to be honest. I'm not doing enough.
Yep.
It's not why I'm here, right? So, and I'm
Joe,
sure that's not why a lot of you are here, but I know that's not why I'm here.
Speaking for me, I'm with you.
Right.
I'd like to see 20, if we feel like 25 or 30s even there. If we want to say 20 to 30 as a range, I'm good with that. That we have the discretion to go outside of that.
Yeah.
I'm perfectly fine. The part that I'm still having trouble, wrapping my arms around is what happens after the 10 years.
And that's why.
And the bigger the percentage, the greater the impact.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So it's illegal to build into a pilot. What happens after the pilot expires?
Well, it's not that. It's that once the pilot is done and there's no benefit that we're not providing any benefit, the contracts all terminate, the leases and the pilot agreement. So we don't have a relationship anymore with the developer, with the owner of the units. If like the state has regulatory agreements that regulate the units for the life of their existence.
Right.
For affordable use.
For affordable.
So you can't build into the contract some stipulations after the 10 years that anybody that continues to live there pays the affordable rate.
Even if we were,
there's no teeth to it.
We have no
so
teeth
the state
to
is
enforce
still
it.
providing aid with these regulatory agreements. There's still state funding and services being provided. So they have teeth. If you don't comply, you risk your state subsidy. We won't be providing a benefit.
Right.
And so there's no teeth to it.
And you can't go back and ask
What are we
for it.
taking back?
And that's
What's the punishment?
What if you gave them?
We could do longer term pilot agreements on housing to guard against. So if you do like a 20-year pilot, the idea is we maybe have families in there and it's 20 years and it's the duration of the children's schooling or some
Let me ask the
way
question
to.
another way. Sorry for.
Yeah,
but
no, this is helpful.
Over that 10 years, that developer is saving money on taxes.
Yes,
So there is a benefit to them.
during the 10 years, yeah.
Correct. And there's a number.
Yeah.
Let's say that benefit is $5 million after the 10
Yep.
years. If they now decide to raise the rent on some people, can you ask them for the $5 million back?
You could
can, but-
recapture benefits.
Yeah.
Well, you just put a lien on the property. There's a bunch of stuff you could do.
So that's what I would ask Rachel. I mean, and how.
And that's something
How
that if
difficult
they don't
is
do what
that?
they're supposed to do, that's what we should do.
Yeah, because I think that what I'm hearing is, and this is part of the problem right now, because there's a housing shortage, rents are being raised at the point where people are getting kicked out.
Yeah.
If you're gonna do a project, you wanna try to prevent that.
So.
How you do that is, I mean, I'm completely uninformed about the legalities of that, but.
It's exactly the issue, like what happens at 10-year
Yeah.
plus a day?
Right.
And I'm amenable to, like, you know, if it's a, you know, the number that I use for property taxes around here, Joe, is about like 50,000 per $1 million. That's what you're gonna pay. So if it's a $2 million property, that's 100,000. Do we give them continued $10,000 so at least we contractually keep them on board for a 20-year period, you know, like that, so that we get to, I mean, at some point, you know, we have to, you know, like we can't keep doing this indefinitely, but you get to a 20-year, as you point out, right? That's the length of someone's schooling.
Right, something
Right.
meaningful,
Right.
like a generation.
Right.
Let me help you with two things. If we said new construction's affordable, that problem goes away because it's affordable forever.
Correct. Yeah,
All right?
yeah,
Now,
we're not talking.
Now let's say somebody comes in, to Anna's point, and it's an older apartment complex, wherever it may be. It's an old apartment complex that needs to be renovated. They come to us for benefits. We're gonna say to them, okay, we want 30%, right, affordable. In 10 years, that apartment complex is aging. Although they just did a bunch of work to it today, in 10 years' time, that's not gonna get the same rent something that was built brand new 10 years ago is gonna get. So the market's gonna kind of fix that problem so they can't really price people too far out of whack. But if you subsidize brand new apartments in Pittsburgh, in Penfield, or, you know, in parts of Webster, wherever, and in 10 years' time, those 10% or 30%, those people could get hosed. That's why I think us doing new projects that are not affordable just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's never made sense to me. I think if we put something in effect so that somebody that buys some of those old apartments in Arundiquit, which there's a boatload of them that all need a lot of work. In Greece, there's a lot of them. East Rochester, there's a lot of them. Mm-hmm. Somebody buys those, and the project needs $2 million worth of renovation, which now the project becomes really, it just doesn't work, so nobody does it.
Right.
If they could come in and get a tax abatement, and now the project makes sense, and say, by the way, we need 30% of that affordable, you're fixing something in a town that's an eyesore that probably would not get fixed.
It's to the benefit of a lot of people. I agree with you.
So now you're benefiting the people that are already living there, that odds are that is workforce housing already because of the condition and age of the property. So you're gonna benefit those people. And if you could pick up 30% of that as affordable, so now there's 30% of the people in the community that could have never got in there in the first place, get in there. In 10 years' time, when that pilot expires, that complex, it's still 70s, Jay. So the ceilings are low, the rooms are smaller. Those, you can only raise rent so much before it's like Moses parted the sea and everybody leaves. Right. So I think that problem, the market fixes itself.
So what I'm hearing, Joe, is not so much the 30%, but it's the ground up 30%. It's the it's like we're staying away from newer. That's what you're suggesting.
That's what I would suggest.
Or if we're going to continue to do new construction, it just is at the highest level of scrutiny, the highest set-asides, the highest requirements from us.
I wouldn't.
But we're still going to be in that situation where what do you do after 10 years?
Yeah.
What I'm going to look into, and I'll be prepared to discuss this at the next meeting, is a lot of IDAs use what's called a pilot mortgage, which we do not use. It is a mortgage that's filed with the clerk that secures pilot payments, because when you take a property off the tax rolls for a pilot agreement, if they don't make pilot payments, they accrue as contractual payments, not as tax liens, which is two different things.
Two very different
If we use a pilot mortgage, it'll be more akin to a tax lien on the property, which, to Howard's point, I'm wondering if a pilot mortgage could sit on the property for longer than the pilot, such that we would have the privity, the lien, and an ability to recapture for amounts that might have been provided 10 years before, because we've got that pilot mortgage.
The only thing is, a pilot mortgage less competitive than what you would see in in the marketplace.
Less competitive.
So I
It
don't.
doesn't cost them anything.
It doesn't cost them anything?
No. A pilot mortgage, so if you and I were gonna go develop something, and let's say Five Star Bank was gonna finance it for us, they would know there's a pilot in front of them.
Yeah.
And then that bank would make sure too that you're honoring your pilot.
Okay, so if it's just seniority, that's a different.
It is
Okay.
priority in payment
all
on
it
the
is.
pilot mortgage. The banks, they get a little uncomfortable and it'll be a learning curve for banks locally because we've never used them. But once you explain to the lender, look, we're just making the pilot payment the
100%.
same as if there was a tax lien. Tax liens are always gonna sit in front of you, lender. We're just making the pilot payment akin to that.
And banks are familiar with it. I've been asked, I don't know how many times,
Okay.
is there a pilot mortgage in front of us?
Yeah.
And if there is, there's a document you need to sign that any proof of what you owe to the pilot, you have
And
to
No, that's
prove,
helpful. I
you
just
have to
want-
show
I
cause
just
to them
want-
that you did
And
it.
the
Where-
amount that's secured is typically the biggest payment due on the pilot agreement, so that, because you have to have an amount that you're securing, so we
So
typically make
would
it.
it be the biggest one as in the year one?
No, so the biggest savings are in year one. Their biggest exposure on payment is actually later in the pilot. They pay the most in year 10, they're paying the most.
Okay,
So
so,
we secure the biggest
Okay.
payment,
Thank you
which
for
comes
that.
in year
Yeah.
9, yeah.
okay, so
But,
I was just trying to understand if
Yeah.
that's adding additional cost, then it's
It
making the
won't add
project.
additional cost, it'll add
so
an
good.
additional work at the front end for the lenders, which.
Okay.
and I think
So
for
if
us,
we
the
can-
most prudent thing for us to do, and I know we're gonna be giving up fees to some new developments, which I really don't care. I just think the right thing for us to do is we have affordable for new housing. We have a program for workforce housing and older developments that is at least 30%, because I think if you're not doing that, it's a waste. And that'll solve a lot of our problem.
So how do we articulate, so I guess I'm gonna open that up for discussion.
Well, could I just take it to the next?
You can be devil's advocate again?
No, I'm gonna be the construction contractor in the housing markets. Number one, they're the highest violator for local labor waivers. They're the highest repeat of violating local labor policy. So if we're going to make changes, and this is an industrial development agency, and we're talking about housing, at the end of a 2-year or 1-year construction project, there's now a job creation of 2, maybe 4, with a pilot. Now you were talking of the concerns of keeping it going, but let's start from the beginning. Right now, there's a local contractor on another COMIDA project that never got paid. But yet they're receiving an incentive from us. But that contractor didn't pay their subcontractor, okay? And I want you guys to consider, if this is really industrial development, that don't oversee the construction end. I heard prevailing rate, so I'm hearing that there's going to be money to finance over the 30% of a project to qualify as a prevailing rate.
Depending on how lucrative the benefits get.
But I've personally been on multiple housing projects with very, very shoddy craftsmanship that's not even gonna make it 10 years. Property is only as strong as the roof.
That's right.
And when a gutter guy comes to me and shows me pictures that you would scratch your head and go, this is shoddy craftsmanship, I would like us also to consider, and I like the numbers I'm hearing, to make some skin in the game, right? There's gonna be skin in the game. And to extend a mortgage out to 20 years, that's real craftsmanship. If you can build me a property that's gonna be around for 20 years, okay? This housing project I'm witnessing going up isn't gonna be around for 10 years. That's a concern I have on the end. When I'm sitting in the board is I'm here to talk construction work. What are we gonna do for mechanisms in a situation that we've known Kevin has repetitively gone out and said, hey, those guys do not belong on this site. They get kicked off. Kevin's not gonna come back for 2 or 3, 4 weeks. We, the construction industry, finds them out there again, so they're a repeat violator. I would also like to see more teeth in the industrial development part, the construction part of housing.
I'll tell you something to think about that's interesting. If you look at the number of apartment complexes that have been built in Monroe County, how many of them are still owned by the original developer?
There you go. There you go.
So my business model's, like, I'm a buy and hold guy, right? Like, I own, there's apartment complexes I've owned for 26 years. So, but they're not all like that. And I'm not knocking it. That's their business model and it's okay. But that's another reason I don't want to give that guy a pilot.
Right.
That I know he's going to flip out of it in 36 months. And he's selling it and he's going to increase that. He's going to lower that cap rate based off of our pilot.
And then he's gonna, yep,
And
absolutely.
he flips out of it. And the next guy that buys it, it's up to that guy to make sure he keeps the 30% or whatever percent we agree on. And the construction, to your point, he really didn't care. He cared, but he wanted to get his C of O's. But other than that, he's out. So there's apartments being built right now in Penfield. Way out in Penfield near, I can't think of the name of the home.
Oh, 250 and,
Yeah, near Fallhol's Funeral Home out that way.
it's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
So-
just drove by it.
Yeah, so those guys called me and said, hey, are you interested in buying this when we're done? So and by the way, that project was gonna come in for benefits
Right,
and didn't.
right. So,
Understanding
And still
that
got
though,
built.
Yeah,
so I'm wondering two things. We've got, local labor issues. Yes, we see a high frequency of violations on drywall in housing projects. We made some adjustments to remedy that by adding Stu Ben. We do occasionally get calls about contractors not getting paid, and what we will do in those instances is alert the applicants. We do make phone calls. They have the ability to file mechanics liens, which of course come at a cost for the contractor, but they do have that remedy. And we have a housing project that's been repeated issues on it, and we do have tough conversations with the developers in those instances.
I know
think,
we're watching them.
Yeah, I think with respect to what Joe is saying, a lot of housing projects, people hold them through construction, a certain percentage lease up, and then they sell them.
Right.
That's very common in housing, and you do have the ability to restrict assignments of pilot agreements on housing. We could say, you cannot, if you choose to sell within the first 5 years, fine, good luck, but your pilot will not be able to travel. We'll terminate the pilot if you want to transfer in the first 5 years. I mean, we can do that, but
I wouldn't, I'm not supportive of that. I'd rather get the pilot to where we want it to be, and then let the market take care. The less we interfere with the market, the better. If we're getting, so Troy, I guess to Rachel's point, to emphasize, I think we've already got remedies in place and teeth in place. We may not be utilizing them as much. I know, and it's a separate topic, and I don't want to minimize it. I think we do need some more support for Kevin when we see repeat violators, that it's not a 4-week cycle and so predictable.
He does
okay.
switch it up. That's not, he knows who the repeat offenders are, and he does switch it up.
Careful.
So
This contractor was on site for 8 weeks with 6
We have
people.
the answer to that. We'll talk
Okay.
to you after.
So-
We have the answer.
So I guess back to my IDA
right, and Joe,
with housing. And what we're really trying to do is, if we're job creators and it's in the construction and they're getting a benefit, and we've seen now where the government put a 30%, and we've seen projects come in at 27, 28, they don't qualify, okay?
for prevailing wage.
Just for the prevailing rate. But another thing to consider, and this is just an opinion for housing, is to help strengthen the quality, the efficiency, and to make sure our money is doing the right thing for the community, which in construction, lift up the construction worker. There should be apprenticeship and qualified contractors with certified apprenticeship programs to help cut costs, help build the workforce, and help the contractors spend this money where it needs to get spent for the future. That's where I was going with.
I think so.
I struggle with housing and this IDA board.
So
When the construction industry in Rochester, it could do better. Always room to do better.
And I don't disagree with you, Troy, but I'd like to try and separate those two. I would say when it comes to industrial development, and I'm going to use a generic term, economic vibrancy, I think having affordable housing for the range of workers is in our best interest as a community. And I think that's what we're trying to address now. I'm not trying
So that's
to.
workforce housing.
That should be in our mission statement.
Right.
Going back to Robin and Allison, heard the head of the ABO say, you want to do housing as an IDA, it's got to be in your mission statement, and you need to have a study. And, forgive me if this was addressed at the top of the meeting, but I think, we would be smart to be armed with data. We have no shortage of expertise on this board and great anecdotes and information about, to your point, Joe, about developers selling off properties. It'd be great to get somebody come in and do a market analysis, provide us with data, and help guide us on what we should and shouldn't be doing.
You're absolutely right. And we did tell. Yeah, let me just. So I think there is value in having affordable housing across the spectrum. And what we are talking about specifically is there's all kinds of economic incentives for luxury housing. As we get more and more people earning higher incomes, the market will naturally address their housing needs. What we're talking about is places where the market, it may not be as economically attractive to provide housing for the 1,000 Amazon workers, the Fairlife workers, those type of folks. And I think this is what, at least in my mind, what we're trying to address here. I think we can get to what you're talking about as a separate issue, but because I think that's a broader issue than just housing. There ought to be apprenticeships.
I'm just following, Jay, that if the government's going to say, if the project is 30% funded, you're going to work this project under these guidelines. I don't see an IDA having an issue to take those guidelines on any housing project that gets funding. After hearing that at 50% affordable, I'm still satisfied and smiling and doing the dance. I struggle with that, Joe. I'm going to be honest. I struggle with that, especially in an IDA setting. I understand that the housing's supporting the workforce, supporting the economic driver. But if we're going to throw money and you're going to change your policy, why can't we at least entertain looking at, okay, I don't think the whole board understands, Rachel, a 30% funded housing project in New York.
So
what qualifies? What triggers it? What are now the guidelines that this contractor has to follow? Why is that a struggle for us to do on a lower level of any housing?
So are you suggesting that we just say housing projects are subject to prevailing wage?
Not prevailing wage, but at least contractors. We're all talking about workforce development. We're throwing how many millions out of this room for workforce development? Workforce development doesn't happen until you have the jobs creation.
Yeah.
Now here's a tool that you're going to build housing. Housing is going to go berserko bunko crazy here.
It already is.
What are we doing is with the IDA funding to help support the MAP, the tracks, the WDI, RCCI, and that is one simple thing. You put contractors that have certified apprenticeship programs on that job, now you have real workforce development. They have a job to go to every day. And if it's in the city, this might be a job that an individual might say, I want to live here.
Troy,
And
it's-
I built this apartment. I worked on that tub. I worked on that kitchen sink, you know?
Troy, you're asking the right questions. The only thing that, and I'm not trying to sweep this under the rug, what I'm trying to do is, there's a lot of things we can do, and what I'm trying to do is, let's get one thing done, let's attack the next, because if we keep throwing things on here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna meet constantly and nothing's going to get done. And I'm just trying to push one thing forward as simply as we can and say, once we get that done, then let's come back and attack the second issue.
Yeah.
And that's,
And I also think we want to, like, what's the goal? If the goal is to get affordable units into projects that we're participating in, then okay, that's the goal. At some point, the restrictions in the policy will become so onerous that no one will, our goal will get undercut because people will self-select out of it. They will decide, I'm not going to go to the IDA, which is fine. They can build their projects without us, but that means we won't have local labor on the job. We won't have affordable units. So we lose that ability too.
and yeah, I agree, and we don't want that, but what I'm trying to do is trying to have a single-minded purpose here, which is just to get more incentives for the housing that we feel we need in the community. And Anna's right, we do need the studies, but in the absence of that, we got to start here, and then we'll do the studies. And then what we can do is what you're talking about, Troy, is construction workforce development. I think that's a whole separate topic that we should tackle, but when we weave all of these things together, what I've seen is we just have constant conversations and we don't get anything done. So I'd like to just focus on housing, and I promise the next thing we'll do is workforce development in the trades, which we all know we need. If we can get more people in the trades, that's better for our community as well. But if you just grant me a little bit of leeway to get this through, then
Can
we
I
can
Well, I
tackle.
think
Can I
government's
just
got to do
throw out a
multiple
few
things.
thoughts? It looks like, you know, the research that Rachel did on what the other IDAs are doing, they really go at a specific issue, like market rate senior housing, market rate housing, depending on the macro issues of the area that they're trying to help. And we don't do that. We're just saying housing, 10%, you know, we're without the data. Perhaps that's the reason, because we can't maybe get more specific on the benefits that we'd like to give for specific needs in the community, the broader community.
It wasn't
Goes
too
back to
long
the
ago
market study.
It does, yeah.
It wasn't too long ago that affordable housing, assisted living, senior living, student housing was all prevailing rate work. That was all covered under prevailing rate work. Every single one of those projects. Now here we're talking about supporting those same projects without prevailing rate work, and we're still not getting back to the root. And the root isn't to say it's prevailing rate. The root would to say, I have apprenticeship programs certified. I'm doing the right thing for my community. I'm supplying labor. Yes, they might be learning, but they've been trained enough to stay safe.
You want to
and
find
get
a
the
market
job
for
done.
them. And I agree with that. We absolutely do need to have that.
With all the other thing governance needs to do, and I thought you were hitting this one as the one on, and if you are going to change it from the what it was to what is, could we not consider, at least, they want to do a study, let's do the study.
I think we're trying to get an interim policy until we can get a
Get the
study
data,
done,
yeah.
target things like,
Right.
I mean, we're just trying to,
And I think this answers Ann's question. This is, always will be a work in progress. What we're trying to do is make what we have now, which everybody has concerns about, a little better.
Yeah.
So, and I don't want to let our desire for perfection get in the way of making an improvement that will be substantially better. So Ann, I mean, I think we can get there, but I'd like to see data before we say.
That's the whole.
Right, but we don't have
discussion.
that. So in the,
But we need to act on getting the data.
and I think we've agreed to do that. But what's on the table right now is what improvements we can make, and this is just the pragmatist in me. And then what we're trying to do is to say, look, if we put these incentives in place as we see now, will the market just naturally gravitate towards where we need it? And if it doesn't, we can adjust, and and in the interim, even if we okay to study right now, it would still be several months before it showed
Quite
up.
some time.
And who knows how many projects come in prior to
I
that.
want to say two things, Tim. So back a little while ago, Rachel mentioned, we could terminate a pilot. And you said the smaller percentage we have, the bigger problem we have. So I disagree with both of those things because let me finish.
Yeah.
If it's affordable, you never want it. It doesn't matter.
I just want to correct you. I think the bigger the percentage that we have for affordable, the bigger the problem.
Right, that's what I meant to say.
Yeah.
And I disagree with you, Jay, because if I own an apartment building and I have a 10% set aside, that's kind of easy for me to hide in the demographic of the complex. The larger that becomes, the more that complex that's integrated in the complex, and it's hard to turn it around. So that's where I tell you, to me, 10% and even 20% is so de minimis that it just can go away pretty easy. When you start crossing 35% of a building is affordable, that's hard to unwind. The larger that number is, the harder it is to unwind. And when a whole complex is affordable, you can unwind it.
Yeah. So when a whole complex is, we have a whole set of other laws that prevent that.
Correct.
All I'm trying to say, and I haven't said it well, is however that unwinding happens, I want it to be at least disruptive to the lives of.
Correct.
So if a developer goes through and on the 30%.
I'm with you. It makes total sense what you're saying.
Wants to unwind it, they could unwind it several ways. They could come in and say, okay, 10 years in a day, all 30% of your rent is going up.
As their leases come due.
As their leases come due.
Correct.
Right? Or they could say, no, I'm gonna do this slowly. We hope they do the right thing.
Right.
All I'm saying is we want to give them the incentive to do this in a way that is least disruptive to those folks that are there. Someone who's now become a member of that community, has their kids in school.
100%.
Right? What I don't want is, it's disruptive to lives, but if we want to be more pragmatic, I don't want a reporter out there saying, look at this person moving out,
Yeah.
And I think that's all, nobody wants that. Nobody wants that from just a morality and
100%.
ethics standpoint, but we also don't want to bring any shame or bad news on the board.
But unless there's no end date on the pilot, that's not,
What do you mean?
you can't, there's no control.
Yeah.
Is there air conditioning in here?
The other thing that I
So
think
Rachel,
We
can you
had Julie call facilities.
Can you
'cause
look
there's an
into
issue.
what are
Yeah.
our options to maybe extend it from 10 to a 20-year, and then at least, have it so that it ends up being a gentle transition, as opposed to an abrupt transition. That's all
Okay.
I'm,
But it doesn't, but I understand what you're saying, but like the said family could move in at year 18
Right,
of the, it's never gonna be the right
Correct.
mix for,
right, so how long do you keep it?
That's a
Yeah.
good point, yeah.
So those are the discussions I think we
Yeah.
ought to have. So like if we've got 30%, right, and it's year 18, and that pilot is starting to get long in the tooth, should we be looking and saying, do we, at that point, as leases start to go and they're gonna turn it to market rate, we don't want someone to come in for 2 years knowing that 2 years later. So those are the things I
makes me
just.
think
you just
we
gotta-
should not be in this business.
I'm telling you.
I mean,
there's a certain
that-
level of risk.
maybe we come back to where
What
Joe
Robin
is
and
on
I were
this, right?
talking about
I mean,
is when you have like the project across the street, it's 100% affordable. There's protection for the people that are going in there.
That's
Are we
important.
setting people up for a bad situation?
And
That's-
I want you to think, I want all
think
of us to
that's
think along
outside
these
of
lines. As the
who we are.
complexes get long in the tooth, not just the pilot, rental rates come down.
Not a
Relative
lifetime.
to the-
Not
to
a
the
lifetime.
To the market, right?
Yes.
The newer complexes set the market.
Right.
They just do. And whether it's brand new or newly renovated, they set the market.
Right.
In the older places, they continue to go down. So, I own an apartment complex that was built in like 72. it's, the roofs are new, the windows are new, the bathrooms are new, the kitchens are new. I am not gonna get what you're gonna get if you build something with higher ceilings, bigger rooms. I'm just not. No matter what
Agreed.
happens, I'm off 30, 40 points.
Right.
It just is what it is. So that part of it works itself out. And this brings me back to where I started from the beginning. I think we're making a mistake doing anything that's not affordable, whether it's senior affordable, and then if something comes in that's workforce, I think we can look at that with a percentage that's north of 30. And by the way, that 50% number, I also did a calculation pre-COVID. What would that look like? That was more like almost 38% then. It's like a 12% swing since COVID increased. But,
You know, I mean,
does that make sense?
Makes
So-
perfect sense.
so to that point, again, I'm gonna ask people, do we wanna look at that? I mean, given some of the issues that are being raised here, do we wanna look and say, our policy is just affordable and workforce housing at 30% minimum?
I think so.
I think
That makes
my
total sense.
recommendation,
And if we're at 30%, I don't think people are gonna do luxury housing with 30% affordable. I don't think they're gonna want.
so two things. I think it would be helpful to get an interim policy where we're requiring, maybe it's 20%, maybe it's 30%. I think 20 is a better place to start for now, because I would hate to see us start inducing projects at 30% set aside. Are we setting up now 30% of these units for failure in the future?
I
So-
totally disagree with that.
And that could be, and that might be very true. It's just one idea. So let's pick a percentage. Let's get an interim policy together. Let's get a housing study underway and figure out what the long-term decision of the board is. And maybe the long-term decision is we're not doing new construction market rate housing.
But if you do an interim policy right now, you still haven't solved the problem of what happens after 10 years.
No,
Two
I know.
projects that would get
Yeah,
approved in the next 6 months.
yeah, or 12 months, I mean,
Right.
just, you know, whatever.
Right, by the time we,
And
So-
that might mean we just accept the fact that after 10 years,
and that
But you
could
let the
be.
free market do what it's
Yeah.
gotta do.
that
Yeah.
might,
We've
that
at
might be
least
the
helped for
only.
10 years.
But,
Yeah.
but if you don't do
But
new
Anna, I mean,
housing,
just speaking for myself, knowing that this issue is out there, I can't unsee it now. I don't want
Right.
to, I don't want to have that occur in 10 years.
Right.
Not for something that
I think
it'll, if you do workforce or existing older complexes, that impact's gonna be much, much less than if you did something that was brand new. Much less.
Lisa was
But the
going
issue,
to make a
the
comment.
issue is you've got to disclose to them at the very beginning. If somebody's going into a luxury apartment at a lower rate, you've got to disclose to them, there's a pilot program for 10 years. We don't know what's going to happen at the end of 10 years. They need to know what's going to happen, and then they can make their own decision. Do I want to be in a nicer area? I've got a child who's got 5 more years in school. I can move into a better school system for 5 years, knowing that I have to move in 5 years. I mean, if you're disclosing to them exactly what it is, and if there's 2 years left of the pilot, you have 2 years. Potentially, it's going
It
to go
seems
up.
to me they would have to disclose that.
Well, you would.
When you're renting.
Well, you don't, but you should.
Oh, okay.
They don't.
You don't. But if you,
don't
if
have
you
to.
force them to put some type of a disclosure into there, these people are gonna know it. And let's be frank, you know, there's a lot of people out there that, you know, maybe they're going through a trade program, maybe they're in college, maybe things are going to change in 2 or 3 years, and they're like, this is great, I can afford it now, I'm gonna be getting a job, I'm gonna be doing this, I'm gonna be doing this, and I can afford to stay in 3 years when the rents go up. As long as you disclose and they understand the process, I don't see the issue. But I mean, if you're, as what you're saying, if somebody's going in thinking next year it's okay, and all of a sudden the rent goes up $1,000 a month, you know, no, that's not fair. But I guess in my business, you disclose.
So in the affordable
Show,
units, it would be disclosed in their
Correct.
lease that.
How many, what the
Even
term
if we disclose
available.
though,
Yep.
people
No teeth.
forget. People forget,
And then-
and you still get
But
to
we-
that horrible
But at least you
situation.
have.
And there may,
Think
and
at least this
to
way.
your point, there's nothing we can do
I
about it.
agree with you in theory, it's just in practice, and you've probably seen it, where you disclose everything, but there's a bad outcome, and it's just,
Yeah,
I-
I'm really big on disclosure. I'm really big on telling everything. I mean, I'd
people
rather
make their
have
own
it not
decisions.
happen than happen and let everybody know the true answers. But, I mean, even
maybe that's where we'll get to,
even
but just.
re-signing the lease. I mean, so re-sign the lease. Okay, you're re-signing the lease, understand there's only 8 years left in the pilot. You're re-signing the lease, understand there's only 2 years left in the pilot. So maybe reiterating it every year with the current with the new lease and the time that's left, if we could put something into play, then maybe that will at least help a little bit understanding where it's gonna go. I just don't see how you can control it after we're done. I mean, I guess I don't see that proportion.
And we
You
may
can't.
end up there,
You
Lisa,
can't.
but I think the discussion we're having is to say, can we come up with a better option than going there? Maybe that's where we land, but what I'm hearing is, and I guess it's a point of discussion, do we just say, hey, the things we'll support are 100% affordable, that's always easy, right? We're gonna support existing, upgrades to existing housing stock with a 30% affordable, and we're not gonna discriminate between senior and whatever. If you're going to buy senior housing that's existing and you're gonna upgrade it, but we're just not gonna entertain new,
And see, I agree with that point.
new bottoms up.
I don't understand giving money to people who are gonna pay like $2,400, $2,800, $3,200 for an
Makes no
apartment.
And those
It
are,
doesn't make any sense
and those
to
are
me.
primarily new,
Right.
ground
right.
up. So we can take all of that off the table by saying, we just don't
do those.
We just
Right.
don't, we
And-
just
just
don't.
don't do it.
And see, I agree with that portion. I mean, I see seniors that can't stay in their homes anymore and they have no place to go. I mean, I've got a gentleman going into a trailer park, into like a $25,000 trailer, because that's all that we can possibly get for him. He can't afford the rent,
And those
but he's
things-
gonna have enough equity from his sale to go into a trailer park. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
and we're seeing, seniors, we're seeing, single parents, we're seeing, a montage of things, but it's always on the lower levels. So I do have a problem when we have people coming in with these higher levels
Me
and
too.
wanting.
I think we all do.
I always
there's-
have.
There's
Yeah.
big money here. I mean, I have the amount of money that I'm seeing and overages on house prices and even at interest rates of 7.5%. I mean, they're still going 100, 200,000. Areas that were selling 150 are selling 350. So the money is out there for those higher levels, but it's the lower people that are getting
Pushed out.
Right.
Come to me
So-
and tell me you only have 3% and you have to go FHA, and I have to look at you, or a VA, and I have to look at you and say, it's never going to happen. I'm not gonna be able to get you a
These are good
house.
people. Yeah.
And
These are
on the
good
subject
people.
of trailers too, I just want to point out as an anecdote, we have a number of trailer park developments in Monroe County, and the state has some affordable housing dollars that are available for
them.
homeowners to invest in home repairs, but you're only eligible if your manufactured home was built after 2006.
Yeah.
And now our community development team is considering instituting the same rule, and it's got to do with construction challenges. You put a new roof on an old manufactured home,
Right.
and it can cause other
The
issues.
walls can't.
And so I asked Chan, our community development manager, to come to me with some data on, we don't want to just turn people away. What's going to happen to them? Anyhow, yeah, that's a whole other.
Yeah, and that's
subject.
a whole thing with being able to mortgage it and finance it as well. I mean, it's basically like a car, they're saying, okay, everything's changed, and it's basically a tin can that you're trying to, put a
Correct.
label on.
Right.
So, yeah.
But it's the only option for some folks.
It's the only option, yeah.
So thoughts, where I'm hearing we're evolving to, and is that our housing policy should be to support affordable, support upgrades to existing stock. This would include any of the redacted
areas.
Yes, what you just said. And we'll only consider new projects in blighted areas. And I know Pittsford Canal Side tried to make the argument that theirs was in a blighted, and we found that on its face to be ludicrous. But we will support new housing only if it's in blighted areas, and any of the upgrades and new housing in blighted areas, we're looking for a minimum of 30% affordable. Thoughts there?
That sounds good to me.
Sounds good to me.
So the blighted
And
comment
disclosure.
is up to the discretion of the board?
It's up to,
Using
and this is the two meeting rule will be helpful. When someone comes in and says, yeah, this is a blighted area in Pittsburgh, we're looking like, seriously?
Yeah, right.
Really, this is the best you got,
What about new construction,
Seriously.
workforce housing, where you've got those rents that somebody earning between 80 and 120 AMI could go into those? And it would be new construction.
And I'm gonna try and articulate from my understanding, because Joe's really helped me understand this. is it by limiting it to upgrades on existing rental stock, you'll
have
naturally
those-
get
That workforce
that,
housing.
That's gonna be workforce housing, it just is.
yeah.
And
What about disclosure? An obligation on the part of the developer, if they get benefits, to disclose to tenants.
I think we want to put that in there. I think Rachel's going to look into a couple things
Yeah, we
where
can
we
look- I
can
mean,
maybe,
we'd have to
Maybe
see copies of
extend that.
leases to know whether the disclosure
Yeah.
happened, so it's another thing to monitor on compliance, which I think we're gonna be outsourcing anyway.
but if you can look up at that pilot mortgage
Yep.
and,
Yep.
you know, I still, and if it doesn't work, I'll get off this soapbox. If we could extend it for a little bit of a longer time period to, I think, if the housing stock naturally just comes to that point,
Right.
I would be open to, at least, and I'm just speaking for myself, that years 11 through 20 with a pilot mortgage in place, that, you know, they're paying 90% of their role, but they're still maintaining their, you know,
Right,
the affordable component. I would be supportive of that. It addresses a big issue of getting it on the tax roll at a very high percentage, and an issue that I see, which is not really disrupting lives or minimizing that disruption.
and which, and doing.
But Rachel needs to look into
Yeah.
what are the options.
And I think we're accomplishing a few things. If you do strictly affordable that's new, it's always gonna be affordable. That 10-year
Yep.
problem goes away, right?
Yep.
And it solves a lot of the problems that you just discussed because they're not as profitable.
Right.
It makes total sense to do that for all those projects.
Yep.
They're harder to run, they're harder to rent out, they're not as profitable. If we do the 30% with older projects that you mentioned earlier, they're already
The
long
market's
in the
already
tooth,
taken, yeah.
right? They're already at workforce market. They just are, maybe even below some of them, depending on the condition they're in. So if they come in and say, hey, we need to put $3 million in here, we want a tax abatement for 10 years. In 10 years from now, it's still gonna be workforce housing, just because the structure and layout that they're not gonna fix. Unless it's in Pittsford and in certain parts of town, which you'll still get the long dollar for it just because of where the dirt is. But depending on where it is, which that can be up to our discretion,
But we
you
look at
solve that problem too. Because in 10 years, that 1970 complex that came in here to get renovations, it's just 10 years older,
Yeah.
right? The architecture's still it's 10 years
You're
more
never gonna
outdated
make
than it
it,
was
yeah.
when they started.
Yeah.
So I think it solves a lot of our problems. And I think it'll make things easier for Robin and the staff logistically. And hopefully we don't put ourselves in a position where we get sued. So
I have a quick question.
I
like we
do
have,
too.
Pittsburgh, since I do live there. So you do not want to do new construction with, say, 50% affordable housing? You don't want anything to go there?
Yeah,
Okay, so like I guess one of the issues in Pittsburgh is there's no workforce housing. It's very hard for people to work in Pittsburgh.
if somebody wanted to come to us and say, hey, we want to build workforce housing in Pittsburgh, and it was 100%,
but that's affordable. It's the
it would have to be affordable. And
One of
it
the-
would be affordable. For Pittsburgh, it'd be affordable.
They don't
One of
want
the issues that I'm having in the
affordable.
legislature
Right,
and in Pittsburgh is, when you use the word affordable, nobody knows
Nobody
what that
wants
rent
that.
means.
Right.
So is there like a sheet of paper that
Yes.
says, here's.
HUD, we have HUD rents, the 2024 numbers just came out effective June
So like
1st.
1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms,
Correct.
they'll give you those.
Yeah,
And
we
the
have
number of individuals
60 to
living there.
80%.
I know that, but like the real rent number.
Yeah, and that was a question. I
Chair
had
wants to
as
make
well.
a,
Is-
ask
That's
a
great, but
question.
we should give what the rents are.
Yeah, that's what I would need for
Yeah.
my
So let's-
legislature responsibilities.
Yep,
I just wanna run through
Folks,
an
Ann wants to ask a
example.
question really quick.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The upcoming May board meeting.
Yes.
We have the Reedman project
Yes.
on the agenda. And for phase one, it's housing units and it's for students
Student
that are healthcare, medical. So what percent are
So-
dedicated?
Not. So
that.
because it's student housing, it operates outside of this policy.
Shelter rent.
It's shelter rent, student
I
housing, so
see.
they are not, I mean, students don't show any income, so they are
So
not
they would go
required.
forward.
they're not within this policy.
Yeah, there's a whole separate track for that.
It's a whole separate policy.
So let's take, there's a long vacant apartment complex in, let's call it Pittsburgh, and they want to do a project there. And they're gonna, I don't know that this is the case, but let's say it is. They're gonna demo the whole thing and build new. Do you consider that adaptive reuse? Erie
No.
County does.
I don't.
No, that's
You
new,
ca-
that's
you-
new.
that's
yeah.
new construction.
New housing. On the flip side, if they have it and they're going to renovate it, then they'll naturally they'll get lower rents.
Right.
And that is something we would consider.
Right.
And we'd have that
But
two-cycle
if
process.
we're taking it to the ground and we're
We're
building,
buying it
that's
for
new
the,
construction.
that's new construction.
It's new, 100%. And no disrespect, but that, your scenarios in
No, I
Pittsburgh,
know.
it would never happen. Like where it would be empty in Pittsburgh, wouldn't happen.
Right. What do you mean?
What is it?
Yeah, she's talking about the farm bazaar, and that was a commercial.
But it's not apartments.
No, it wasn't, it was never
No.
apartments.
It was never
No,
apartments.
it was always,
Right.
I mean, that was apartments
commercial
before.
space, small
Yeah.
businesses and office
Yeah.
space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think this two-cycle
But
process will weed,
Still a vacant building.
but it'll weed some of this stuff out.
Yeah.
If that developer comes through and say, hey, I'm looking to get $3,400 a month rents, we'll be like, live long and prosper. You know, we're just,
Right.
we're-
Live long and prosper. Go for it. He said that last week, I was dying.
So that being said,
And how about this,
That
the
being
Mark
said,
for
would you-
Henrietta housing?
That's a
how
whole
was it?
other
Well,
conversation to
putting
talk about.
you in the position of being the bad
How
guy,
it is
is
all
that
senior?
That's
It's our
okay.
job.
appropriate?
That's okay.
Like,
It's
we
a
say, hey, here, you know, I don't know how your project, you know, if it's, you know, not affordable, whatever, and we say, well, there's a just like COMIDA, you can come to the, like, I'm just saying, good luck to you.
How big
Like,
is it?
So what
so-
Robin's
so-
saying
so-
is, staff isn't always very successful at deterring applicants, no matter how hard we
Yeah, it's
try.
large.
And we try
And
to
we've seen
avoid a
that.
It's
situation
not on the agenda.
where the board is being set up
It
to be the bad guy.
is.
We
It is.
we
Still
really
is.
do try to avoid
Still on
that,
the
where they have to
agenda.
come in front of you publicly and be
Just
told
came
no.
to an
But with
agreement.
this is gonna happen.
And-
We just wanna
I
warn
think,
you.
And that's
I-
okay.
I'll
if
speak
you're
for
okay with that
myself,
position,
I'll speak for myself and say, that's kind of our, if they're not listening to those
Yeah.
folks, I mean, I think it's very
Right.
simple, like, we have principles.
make-believe.
Hey,
Yeah.
when it comes to housing, if you can't show affordable, you can't show that you're upgrading existing housing stock and it's really workforce, and it's in a blighted area, you're gonna have a tough time with the board.
Yeah.
You're more than welcome to go before the board, but
They're-
I'm telling you, your chances are low.
It's the Shark Tank.
Listen, I want to
But if
leave.
they're new construction, we just say, no, sorry.
Unless it's blighted. If you're new construction in the northwest of the city of Rochester.
Yeah, exactly.
And are we measuring blight based
Right,
on,
geography?
I
yeah,
think-
what are we measuring on?
I think there has to be a reasonableness argument. Like if we just say, if we define it the way we've been defining it now, which is the entire city of Rochester's blighted area, you can look and say, look, the board is gonna drive by and they're gonna look at this stuff. And if you're on Park Ave and
Look at
saying,
vacancy rates and.
yeah, yeah,
and
Distract,
I mean, we-
send
yeah.
distract.
Yeah, you can't
Vacancy
use
rates
the
are the
city.
only method.
Yeah.
We're renting apartments out on Park Avenue for $2,600.
right, that's exactly
Come
right.
on,
Yeah,
it's
just say,
ridiculous.
There are pockets of the city that
Right.
definitely
You-
don't.
You're gonna have to stand before the board and make a credible argument
That
that this is a blighted or a distressed area.
That
And
needs-
that's where we look and say, are you-
Otherwise undesirable.
yeah, are you really gonna argue Park Ave is a distressed area? And that $2,400 a month rents
Mm-hmm.
in, that clearly shows you're in a distressed area.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Good luck with that argument.
But I will say that there is very few blighted areas in Rochester right now. We are seeing housing sell in Rochester in areas that have never sold before for unrealistic prices.
So maybe blight isn't
So,
the benchmark.
Yeah, so it's really tough now because what you may have thought was not a desirable area 5 years ago is, I mean, I'll take Merchants Culver area. 20 years ago, I couldn't sell a house there.
Right.
40, 50, 60,000. They're selling 300,000 right now. So, I mean, and you can't even, and they're 23, 25 offers, and they're selling cash. So what you considered years ago to not be desirable, it is definitely changed since COVID. So it's a really tough
we can look at criteria around, like blight could just be a criteria that the board looks at. You can look at transit lines. That's always been very of interest to the county as development on existing public transit lines. Things like that would tell a whole story that makes new construction worthwhile in an area. And
It's
we can
workforce,
develop that.
it's workforce housing. And
Exactly.
those are things,
Right.
I think, it's okay, we're not prescriptive, that you go down and you say, we meet these criteria. I think this board has very good discretion, and just as an example, it's this discussion. We really, I think, ended up in a good spot. So if the applicant feels like they are in a distressed or blighted or whatever, let them come make that argument. I think you can give them guidance as to say, hey, this is an easy sell, this is so-so, and this one's a tough one.
Yeah.
And we'll, if we're the bad folks, we're the bad folks.
I got a quick question for Joe. Is it possible to build new 100% affordable units?
100%. And make money?
Yeah.
100%. But
Are you asking within the auspices of this hypothetical new
Well,
policy?
what I'm suggesting is that if a community that has, it's a wealthy community, I'm not gonna name one, but a wealthy community, and they want to build new, all affordable housing, I'm not even saying you can get it through their process of approval.
Yeah.
You can still make money.
you could still make money.
So you don't wanna have that ability.
But
We do.
If it's 100%
We do.
affordable, they're fine with it.
Yeah, we have
100%
the
affordable, they could do
affordable
it.
is our first criteria. We'll support that all day
Then
long.
it doesn't have to be blighted.
No,
No, not at all.
Oh, it's affordable. As long as it's affordable.
So let's go down, 75%. Would that still need to be blighted?
Rephrase the question for me.
In other words, if it's 100% affordable,
No,
you're not gonna have a blighted,
correct.
how about 75%?
You
Then
don't
we,
get the help of the
then you
state.
didn't, then I wouldn't be interested in.
then,
Okay.
then you start to get all the issues that we brought up and how do you
I'm
tackle
just trying
that?
to
Listen,
look at.
I want everybody to think of one thing before we leave this room today. There's two sides of this. So when you give a developer benefits, there's everybody in the county that's paying property taxes, and a lot of people, to your point, that struggle paying property taxes. That development could help them and lower their tax rate. So the moves we make affect what people
What
pay.
we're trying to do is increase the tax base.
We want to increase the tax base. If we took that huge development in Penfield off the tax rolls, that hurts everybody in the county.
They're
It's
all-
getting built anyway.
Yeah, they're all using services that they're really not paying for.
Correct. I mean, it just makes no sense to me.
No, Joe, this is, it
the
was a
one thing
moment of enlightenment, so.
The one thing I would add to what you're saying is that someone who ran a school district, I'm willing to listen to abatements over an extended period of time because I know my costs are gonna go up and I have a tax cap issue I have to deal with. So having a consistent increase in assessed value for a project isn't necessarily a bad thing as opposed to getting it all at once, because I can't really grab it.
And I want you to think about this too. What really bothers me is I don't look at too much day to day, but I look at our move out sheets. And on our move out sheets, if you can picture, it's got the tenant's name, when they moved in and why they're leaving. 10 years ago, I don't remember seeing people moving out of state. 80%, and I'm probably conservative, of the people that leave the apartments moving to Florida, moving to Carolina, moving to Tennessee. And I watch this and I'm going, like, why? And every once in a while I'll get the opportunity to talk to a tenant that's leaving and say, did you get a new job? No, not really. You know, just between the state income tax, the property taxes, it just doesn't make sense for me to stay here. And I don't want to feed into that. So that's where we need to look and say, you really want economic development? We need to figure out how to stop those people leaving.
Gotta talk to the government.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation.
All right, so to summarize, where we're heading.
I could be pretty easy. I'm probably never gonna vote yay on another housing project that comes through this board. That's my gut right now, because this is all wrong.
So
I'm gonna struggle.
So you think right now, because here's where we're netting out, Troy, is that we are going to support affordable, 100% affordable housing.
100% affordable.
We're going to support projects that provide an upgrade to the
We
existing.
we would consider.
We're gonna, upgrades to the existing housing stock. And only new construction we will consider only in blighted areas. These last two, we would want to see a 30% affordable component. Did I?
In new construction in blighted area, you're gonna see it, you're gonna want a 30% set aside.
Yep,
Affordable is 100%. Upgrading of old facilities,
30% set aside.
30%.
Did I capture that?
You did.
And you gonna vote no for the 100% affordable, my
I
friend?
don't have a warm and fuzzy right now, to tell you the
Well, there's
truth,
no
after an
local-
hour, almost, an hour and 40 minutes here, no. Until there's a component in there that helps the real workforce development, which is construction, I cannot, I don't, it's not there. And it's never been there. I've struggled with this, and I'll support any higher number of the requirements. I agree wholeheartedly. But to hear that we're gonna entertain a second meeting and the back and forth, when staff says, this probably isn't a good thing, it's probably what we'll let you go back to the board and then let the board be the bad guys.
Well, the second meeting is not favorable to the developer or the project owner.
Yeah, but
The
it's-
second meeting gives,
It's a
it
can.
gives well, no, it's not
No.
kicking in the can. Many other IDAs in the state of New York have 2-cycle, for all projects. It
COMIDA
gives
is the
board
only Harris
time
Beach
to
client
consider the
that
project.
approves benefits in one meeting.
The second meeting is actually to avoid us
A mark
approving
forward.
projects that we won't be proud of
Right.
several years from
And
now.
it doesn't make the board the bad guy. We make it very clear to the applicants, how things are gonna be, what our policies are. But this gives the board more time to think about things and have dialogue about
More
projects.
research. We did that when I was on town board. We did double shots with most projects because it gives you time to ask questions, to go back, think about it, think if there's any additional questions and be able to do them. It's hard to make a decision like that when we're just getting the information a few days before. So
I would just keep
I love that idea.
in mind for the upcoming meeting that there is a project that will not meet your new qualifications. They're operating under the old policy and will,
I
they're
think-
gonna be grandfathered, so to speak.
I think unfortunately, we just have to, that's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah, absolutely.
This
When
is
you
a
do
work in
policy
process.
changes,
We can't hold them to
There's gonna-
standards
yeah.
is that a
that we,
Henrietta
and just a
project?
heads up, it's just the one.
yeah.
And it is senior housing,
Is
so
the
Henrietta.
ESIV, okay.
Yeah.
So,
Where is it?
yes.
Which one in
yes.
Henry, which project?
Erie Station
The
4,
phase.
the fourth phase of Erie
That's Mark
Station.
Which I have
Yes,
to
it's Mark 4.
not vote on anyway, so.
Yeah.
Anything that I missed?
No, I
Quality
think it was a
Okay.
great meeting.
And in a shout out to my local labor, we will attack the local
Yeah.
labor next.
That's
Yeah,
important.
we have enough.
So,
So we'll revise the policy and reconvene.
okay. And if we could look, do we have calendars? Do we want to look? Because I think the next one should be fairly soon.
In my trailer in Clayton.
Where in Clayton are you?
Just look for the trailer
On
park.
Alex Bay?
Just
Well,
look
there's
for the
like-
trailer
There's,
park.
Are you in
there's,
Clayton?
there's two of them there. Which one are you at?
We
I
have
used
a
to- I
board
used to
meeting
have a
on
place
the
up there.
21st.
Roosevelt.
Are people open, since we're coming here anyway, are we open either before or after that
Pier
meeting on the
65 or Pier
21st?
I can't that day. I'm
So
trying,
just to-
there's
Are
a
you
chance
going just
I may
past it?
not be at that meeting.
We
Okay,
have 7 new
Little
projects
bit.
on that agenda, so
Yeah.
it's a big day.
By the distillery.
Yeah.
how's
Manager
the
golf.
29th or the 30th look?
May.
The 30th works for me.
30th,
I could do either one of those days, Jay.
29th or 30th?
I have a 10 o'clock on the 29th.
I need
30th,
to
I
check
have
my
open.
calendar.
So do we look at the 30th, noon? Or 1 o'clock?
Nothing new after 2.
Staff will make it work.
May
All right.
30th, is that a Tuesday?
Noon?
And,
We can do noon.
May 30th is a Thursday.
That's a
Thursday.
Thursday. We're gonna do noon?
Yep, we
May
good?
30th.
Yeah, good.
All right,
Robin, you'll send out invite,
Just
right?
right now.
That's good.
Okay. Okay,
We just need a motion to adjourn.
I'll motion. I'd like to also motion for air conditioning for our next
Oh my
meeting.
goodness.
Yeah.
All of us are
We
waiting to join
received
you
a
in that.
notification from facilities yesterday that they were having issues, and I think, you know, in the interim, we need to invest in like an industrial scale fan at least if
It'll
these
be a
issues.
Beyonce
Yeah, right.
Move the hot
They have
around.
in the wrong direction.
Yes.
I know, I was sitting here
Troy.
going,
Yes,
sauna.
we could
Troy,
get something like
So when I was
that,
a kid,
right.
my dad had a cottage in